Ooh. All right, we're going live. I figured it out. All right, now we are live, I believe, which is very exciting. Uh, I'm very pleased to announce that the part of this research cohort that was not focused on any technical abilities is doing right. There's also a bit of a delay, so I'm going to turn that off so I do not hear myself in my own head, because that's what I do every day anyway. Um, All right, so welcome. This is our public sharing of research and discovery. This is Maelstrom Collaborative Arts research initiative that we began this year, looking at how live performance translates itself to online delivery. My name is Jeremy Paul. I am the executive artistic director of Maelstrom Collaborative Arts, he, him, and I am have mostly worked in live performance my entire life, specifically as a deviser and a director in theater. And so the last year has been a real shift as we've moved from being unable to do things in a particular place at a particular time with people. And so this whole initiative has sort of come out of that need that has presented itself to everyone. And the people that you are seeing on the rest of this screen are all some of the other artist participants for this first cohort of this research. So we're going to do a quick round of introductions. We'll start with Akane.
Hi, my name is Akane. I use they, them, and I'm a contemporary dance artist.
Great. And then Logan.
Hi, my name is Logan Gabriel Schulman, they, them pronouns, and I am generally a theater multi-hyphenate, director, dramaturg, deviser, and theater technologist.
All right, we'll go Jasmine and then Christine.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. She, her pronouns. I am a filmmaker, photographer, producer, writer. That's all post-production, like recorded stuff. That's where I'm at.
Hi, my name is Christine Piscura. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I am a multi-hyphenate, multi-disciplinary artist.
Great. Then we'll go to Stewart and then Marisol.
Hi, everybody. My name's Stewart Blackwood. I use he, him. I am a composer, sound designer, and creative technologist, focusing on live performance generally.
Good day, everyone. My name is Marisol. I am a painter, dancer. The thing that I do the most would be writing and performing and recording poetry. I love a little bit of this, that, and the other. Cooking also, to me, is art. So I love a little bit of that also. I look forward to sharing with you guys today. Thank you for being here.
Wonderful. And then we'll do Michael and then Molly.
Hi, I'm Michael Prosen. He, him, and I'm a theater artist, performance artist, general theater practitioner.
Hey everyone, my name is Molly Andrews-Hinders, she, her pronouns, and I'm a performance artist, songwriter, and creator of new work.
All right. I also want to shout out that two of the artists that also were part of this that are not here today were John Watt and our cadre member, Meredith L. King. They were both with us for the last 2 months as well. And so just a quick overview of what this was. It was a 2-month sort of a research survey project where we would meet once a week, and we're really looking at some of the ways in which what happens in a live performance context can make the jump to remote delivery. The premise of this entire project is that COVID and the pandemic have really highlighted a problem that was already there, which is live performance has not taken advantage of the digital age. That there are certainly aspects about live performance that are unique to live performance and cannot be replicated, but that we might have overcorrected towards that a little bit. And so suddenly when you are not able to gather, your toolbox is empty. And that moving forward, even once things start to abate in terms of the pandemic, that it is going to be important for live performing artists to find ways to communicate and spread what they do using remote delivery. So that's sort of the thesis of this whole project. For this particular cohort, what we spent the last 2 months focusing on has been what we're calling presenting, but it's really looking at the jump from a live experience to a digital experience. What makes the jump when you put something online and what doesn't? And so some of the questions that we were asking ourselves and the research that we were doing with this was really looking at that transmission point. And so we began by trying to come up with a simple set of channels that described what actually happens in a live experience. What is something that can be tracked as you're moving from live to digital in some way. So that's what we're going to really begin with in just a second. The overall outline of this whole sharing is going to be looking at these different channels that we made up that are in some ways kind of arbitrary, but we needed some sort of a metric in order to track these variables. We're also going to look at 3 arenas of focus that seem to make sense, seem to sort of come out of those channels, and then look at some of the artwork that was created by these participants to interrogate and explore some of those particular areas. And then we'll talk about what are some of the next steps, because this really was sort of a survey, a very broad research project. We're only meeting once a week. So there are more questions coming out of this than I think when we began, but that's to the good. This is work that can sustain itself for quite some time. One quick caveat I will start with here is that we were far less interested in this particular cohort in talking about technical problems or solutions. I hope that doesn't come around to be a problem as I'm doing this live stream and things are hopefully working as they're intended. But there's already a lot of material out there about how to set things up technically. And there are really great tutorials out there about, well, how do you improve your webcam? How do you use 3-point lighting to give yourself a better appearance? Those tools are out there. But ultimately, we don't define this as a technical problem. That will all come in time, or is already good enough as it is. But we were defining it as a more of a philosophical one, which is that you can't just record what happens in a live experience and expect it to communicate to an audience the same way it would if they were live in the room with you. That there needs to be a consideration of how what you're doing in space is impacting that audience, and then how does it become transformed, or how can it be transformed in order to have a similar effect with audience members that are watching online, that could be, in another state, that could be very far away. And then what are the possibilities that leads to? What are some of the aspects of moving online that are freeing, that are actually positives, that we have not just lost things in this move over the last year to some digital performance platforms, but that there are other things that can be gained. So we won't get really technical so much in this sharing. We're really sort of thinking of this as concepts. So with that in mind, we will jump to discussing some of the channels that we identified as being worth tracking in the jump from live to remote, and we'll start with Logan talking about some of those first.
Thanks, Jeremy. So we have a number of channels to look at. I know that I'm one of 4 cohort members looking at some of these channels in detail. And I believe, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of a brief detailing, yes.
Yes.
So with that in mind, I'm looking at some of the channels involving ritual and its contexts, specifically channels involving magic circle, which I will explain briefly, the channels of atmosphere, safety and accessibility, and ephemerality. So magic circle, basically the concept that when you are brought into a performance, there is an immersion that occurs. Whether or not you are at a piece, you are attending a live performance that is intended to be quote unquote immersive, or you are attending a concert, your run-of-the-mill play at a regional or Broadway level theater, it does not matter. There is the initiation, right? There is the walking into the theater. There is the box office experience. There is the waiting in the lobby. There is the milling about. There is the merch table. There is the moving into the space, the finding of the seat, the standing, the finding your space. The thing that coordinates and orients you to being right where you are and ready to go. If you're at an immersive performance, obviously there will be more care given to the way that experience takes place, right? But ultimately, there is the crossing from one place over the threshold into a new place that conditions you to know I am here for this performance. Something that we have felt as a group, as we've sort of explored, was lacking in a Zoom performance, right? That you come to your computer, the place where you exist for your job, for your leisure, etc., and you're just in the same exact place where you've been. So how do we coordinate and encourage this idea of you are crossing a threshold into a new space, is something that we were trying to accomplish and think about. Atmosphere really, of course, is the extension of that immersion into the performance itself, right? And what we recognized is if you don't achieve that idea of the magic circle that is cordoned off around the performance space that immerses you in, the atmosphere of the performance is so abundantly important to holding you in the performance, to feeling what is being given. And if that is not achieved, right, if the magic circle doesn't bring you in and then the atmosphere of the performance itself doesn't extend what the magic circle is given, there's a lack of continuity, right? There's a lack of connection. The way that we feel at most Zoom meetings is that lack of atmosphere. So that's another channel that we were looking at. How do we generate this space when you are, again, in front of this computer? Which I think ultimately came down to different and varying levels of engagement, which other folks will talk about briefly. Safety and accessibility, this came down to, later on, we'll explore a little bit of like Zoom bombing action, which changes the safety relationship in a space of this nature. But ultimately, I think what we all acknowledged is that these digital spaces leave a lot more room for safety and accessibility potentially than live space, right? I know that Christine, our cohort member, had brought up a really excellent point of, going to a DIY space for a show and like the sense of, in their experience, being like a femme-bodied person and like men, right? The danger is inherent in being like a physicalized body in a physical space. And that those dangers don't quite inherently exist in a virtual medium. And so the potentials of being able to capitalize on that inherent safety, being able to further engender a space of safety, connection, and comfort, sort of in the safety of these boxes and the lack of embodied space here that we're sharing. And as far as accessibility, I know that there were certain ideas shared over the course of the cohort's time together of ways of cultural sharing, ways of connecting that we might not be able to in person, that we were able to come together virtually to find accessible spaces, ways that for people who have differently abled ways of moving through space, that a virtual medium sort of levels the playing field in a number of ways. Which is incredibly useful and another channel that we definitely tried to explore as we moved through these experiences of experimentation. Obviously, as Jeremy was saying, there's a number of technical ways that these spaces can become more accessible. So many applications and programs offer, different teleprompting services, closed captioning services. These are all things that could be utilized, but aren't necessarily things that we need to explore here, because those are things that already fully exist. And a simple Google search yields those for folks. So the final channel that I'll be thinking about and sharing with you is ephemerality. And so really that comes down to this idea of time-based art, right? An experience that exists and then doesn't exist after it has concluded. And this thing, which we're talking to you presently and lively, with the exception of a delay, will live forever, right? It will be as exact as it has been in this moment forever, because anyone who wants will be able to watch it on YouTube. What does that mean? Does it have more inherent value right now as you're watching it than if you were to watch it an hour from now? These are questions that we have that we definitely don't have answers to. Something that we wanted to play with, and again, this will come up further as who is talking about engagement? Oh, Akane is talking about engagement of the audience. As Akane, I'm sure, talks about how we engage the audience in a live performance. But how does the ephemerality of a virtual thing allow us to enact and create more performance space as it's happening? So those were the channels that I would share with you, and I would love to now turn it over to Jasmine.
Okay, no pressure. So the channels that I'm covering relate to sensory information. So a lot of this is going to overlap, and as we all kind of go, you'll see there's really no hard boundaries when we start talking about these things. But especially because I am a filmmaker, and I think a lot, like I personally, I wanted to be a part of this particular cohort because most of my work is in the pre-recorded. I'm curious what live performers are missing. And as a filmmaker, what can I bring to the table to, if not match that exactly, at least get to the same sort of emotional response or a similar sort of engagement that can at least hold the same place, right? And so speaking about like the sort of subtitles under sensory information would be space, time, the visual, and the design. And these all kind of flow into one another. And in a second, I'll kind of show an example and talk over it. But, time, most importantly, seeing how it shifts from, as Logan already mentioned, sort of, whether or not something stays online permanently versus whether or not it's, just live and how you engage with that. But there's also time around format. So there's things about maybe a live location where you're like, well, I have to only do this for so long, that maybe switches now that you're doing something live and online and it's present in that sense. But there's also the sense of time of like how we perceive time now that we're in, our rooms, having Zoom calls. The sense of perception of our own time and like what it feels like to have to stare at a screen is different than the theater experience, or even the movie theater experience. And so looking at how that plays into it and how that can also play into the creation of the art you're looking to do. That's the one that is least related to my example, so I want to knock that out now. When it comes to some of these other things like space and design, so now it's thinking about, well, if you are stuck onto your webcam and that screen and this particular corner of your bedroom, what can you do with that framing to also inform the story you're telling? So, that can be as elaborate as, a whole set design, 3-point lighting and a backdrop and all kinds of stuff. But it also can be as simple as, there's a trend amongst newscasters and people that are, being interviewed for news shows to sit in front of fake bookcases to make them look smarter. They're not actual books, but they're wallpapers or like, small boxes or whatever, designed to look like a bookcase so that you get the impression that the expert that you're listening to is an expert because they have so many leather bound books behind them. That's a design element, right? And that informs your perception of what you're seeing on the screen. So again, that's something we can take into account when you're doing something like, you know, a live theater performance through a Zoom call. Like there's things about just framing where your actor is speaking in their space and what that space looks like. That doesn't have to be elaborate and, you know, take a ton of time. It just takes active consideration, right? And that too leads into, again, the visual. There's also visual elements you can play with when it comes to, you know, filters on the Zoom app, or, you know, our group will later talk about using systems like OBS that can allow you to pump in visual information and things. You've seen this on live streamers, Twitch streamers and stuff that can put like GIFs and things, and how that informs, again, the story and image. So there's these elements that are there in the virtual space that we can play around with to inform story, as opposed to just doing I think one-to-one translation is a thing that happens a lot when I watch live performances, is like they want to do like a table read through a Zoom call, and there's so much that's lost between what they're trying to convey and what we're receiving as audience members. So figuring out new ways to consider that kind of stuff. And so I'm gonna just quickly play like an example I used for class, and just kind of walk through just real quick. I don't know, let's see if this is coming up. So what you should be seeing is like a YouTube image of me looking very bored. And this is, I'm gonna just play it on a loop and talk over it. What we needed to do for class was just kind of present a 30, I'm calling it class or sessions. Okay, or sorry, research. I'm having weird tech. Let me do that. So what I wanted to do was make it seem as if this whole clip that you're watching was a live clip within our Zoom call. So it was a clip within a clip, you know, an Inception-esque, no. And then have my live element, you can't see the quotation marks, but know that they're there. Have the live element glitch out like you see right now. And so this is going to play on a loop just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But thinking about, again, there's active design choices being made here. Like I shot this once earlier in the day to make sure that my camera framing was right so that it looked like where I normally look like when I'm having a Zoom call. You know, and so that illusion could be sold when we're in the middle of our discussion, so that it seems as if this was just something my actual Zoom call was glitching out on. Other things, like I said, you know, again, using, you know, additional elements thrown onto this pre-recorded thing to kind of create a sense of design, to create a sense of that visual disruption, and just picking something that looked innocuous and recording it even at like a lower recording level, just so it looks like that grainy Zoom thing. All of those things that were free and easy to do just took consideration to mimic what we were trying to do, which was make it look like an actual live Zoom call. I think I've over-explained that enough. So I'm going to head it over to Michael.
Okay.
Before we jump to Michael, real quick, let's see, Logan, we also have an example of your work. Do you want to share that now, or should we wait till we've gone through all of this? What would you?
I am happy to. I'm happy to show it after all of the channels have been discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, great. Then yeah, Michael, take it away.
Okay, so I'm kind of piggybacking on what Jasmine was talking about in terms of the sensory information that we produce there. I'm going to talk about more of the audio visceral vibration and the sense that you get from that, which is utilizing a lot of the natural things that come through digital technology to kind of use that to expand and vibrate upon that and manipulate the sense of sound in order to get a sort of altered effect, to create something else beyond what you would naturally hear through that. There is Jasmine touched on a sense of movement and spectacle as well, but that's another thing too. Another thing is the use of silence and sensory deprivation. So silence can be used really, really well, because often if we're hearing silence over a digital media through a Zoom call or something like that, it's often perceived as a glitch. But what if we could use that glitch, the silence of a glitch, intentionally to maybe pause or delay, or kind of make the audience feel that, to kind of get them sucked further into it, to think that the glitch was unintentional when in fact it was intentional. And then to just completely cut out as a sense of sensory deprivation, or an oversaturation in a lot of ways too, in a sense of enhancing it through either sound or light or anything else like that, to really kind of overexpose and over stimulate the senses. Yeah, just it's using these using audio in a lot of different ways to just kind of trick or trigger the audience, or trick or trigger is maybe the wrong expression of it, but more really just to enhance the piece and really kind of move it along in another direction. And
knowing Michael as I do, I feel like tricking the audience is not something he would be averse to, but yes. And so actually, we also have an example of something Michael did for a small art piece that Michael made. I think I actually show in back to back with Logan, because I think they both highlight something interesting in different ways. There's sort of a conjunction there. And then also to jump in to say that something that you'll also see later in a couple of the pieces is not just silence in terms of audio, but silence in terms of the visual, and that the visual can often be very dominant, and that sometimes taking that away actually can pull an audience member in even further. But we'll see that with some of the later examples there. But first, we'll finish up with Akane.
All right, so there's just a few more channels that we talked about sort of in the beginning of this process. The first one I kind of want to talk about is the idea of, well, overarching concept for the ones that I'll be talking about is the idea of relationships. So the first kind of area or channel is the idea of embodied experience, which I think is actually something that everybody's touched on in some way leading up to this point, talking about channels, but it comes up in the idea of atmosphere, magic circle, safety and accessibility, sensory information. So I won't talk too much about that, but essentially it's just sort of how we experience a live performance in our bodies as audience members. So that encompasses not just what you experience in your body as you're watching something happen, but it's also in leaving your house, like putting on clothes to go out to a show, getting to the venue, whether it's a whatever kind of venue that it is, just all of the subtle feelings that you experience in your body when you go through all those processes to go through a live performance and then go home. And so we also spoke a little bit about how to sort of reset that experience, because that compared to being at home, you don't have as much of a opportunity to create this like embodiment of I'm getting up out of my room, and the embodiment that you have while you're watching an experience is the same embodiment that you have when you're at home relaxing, not really paying super close attention to a lot of things. And so we spoke about how that sort of just experiences or affects your experience of a performance. And then as far as the next sort of topic, we talked about a group flow state. So that's, just your relationship with your fellow performers. as well as your relationship with your fellow audience members. It goes on both sides, and your flow state that you have all together. That's something that's almost impossible to replicate on a digital platform because of, you're looking at a two-dimensional screen. You can't physically feel the people around you. There's this sort of like tangible sense of connection that's really lost when you're not literally in the same room with each other, with the same like lighting, with the same atmosphere, and just in relationship with each other, which kind of leads into engagement of the audience, which is the third sort of topic under, the channel of relationships. And that kind of, I guess, goes a little bit more into audience and performer relationships, the way that a performer can subtly adjust a performance in response to an audience, and kind of create more of a conversation, whereas performing over a digital platform often feels like performing to a brick wall because you're not getting any of that energy feedback. You're not able to do the crafty part, the artsy part, the ooey gooey good stuff of responding subtly and adjusting as you go. And the last sort of bit of this is audience control and activation, which I guess is, there's a lot of overlap between a lot of these. So it's sometimes almost hard to kind of pick apart or distinguish what's what. But yeah, so audience control and activation is sort of that similar idea of responding to an audience, so subtly adjusting as you go. Yeah, and if there's anything that I missed, Jeremy, please feel free to hop in. But the end part of this actually also goes really well into the second cohort of research and discovery, which is going to dig more into these ideas of audience engagement, and the questions about like how an audience affects the performance, and all of that good stuff. So
yeah, no, I think that was great. And to highlight something, a point that you brought up as well, is that there are certain things that really do not make the leap, and that there are things that are fairly impossible to really pull into a digital product, but that is that there's enough that can be salvaged from the transfer, without that necessarily being a deal breaker, but to understand what is being lost and what strategies you'll need to overcome that is something that just seemed very important. So that's great. And then we have a couple of examples here. So this first one is going to be a piece that that Logan created as part of another performance. I don't know if you want to speak to that first.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak. I mean, very briefly anyway. So the piece, that's going to be shown is like sort of adapted from another piece of virtual work that I've been touring since I guess August of 2020. Basically, I've been working with like performativity and Jewish ritual and performance for the last many years, and specifically with an emphasis on how do we take traditional forms and translate them through a lens of 21st century like technologism, basically. And I guess Zoom performance is maybe a bridge too far as far as the technology and how we proliferate tradition. However, thinking about how does the act of grieving, mourning, become one that can be applied to and adapted via a lens of technology in an age of social distancing, we were wanting to figure that out. And so we created a piece of work that is basically a 40-minute Shiva, which is a Jewish experience and practice basically following the death of a loved one. It's a 7-day process whereby the grieving family invites all manner of friends, loved ones, and community members into their home to grieve with them. And that performance attempted to do that work virtually. So the thing that you're going to see is sort of one element that could be connected to a Shiva, wherein I recite the Mourner's Kaddish, which is a Hebrew prayer that basically extols the virtues of God while also mourning the loss of a very real and significant life, in response to Jeremy assigning us basically a project that was meant to be the length of a joke. So that is the work that you will see now.
Right. And to be clear, this is a recorded, but it was recorded from a live performance. Yeah. All right. Is this showing correct? Yeah.
And along with me now, go ahead and light your candle. Yitzkadal, Yitzkadash, Shnei Rabah. Yoma Dibrach Yute, Yomit Mahute. Bechayekon, Uvyometon, Uvayet Obet Yisrael. Agala Ubisman Yomu Amen. Yehishme Rabba Mevarach Leolam, Lomeo Maya. Yitbarach, Yishtabach, Yitbaar, Yitmaman, Yismase. Yitadar, Yitale, Yitalal, Shmei Kusha, Breku. Leila Minko Birkata Vashirata. Tushbekata Venekamata. Damiram Biama Bimru. Amen. Ose Shalom, Bimramaha. Huya Ase Shalom. Aleinu Be'akol Israel. Bimru. Amen. Now extinguish your candle. Yeah, you're good. You're good to call it. You're good to call it there.
Looked like it might have been a little some video jerkiness there, perhaps, but yeah. So that was that piece, and then this next piece that Michael made was recorded. But one of the things that we talked about is sometimes actually communicate something that would happen in a live performance. A mixture of live and recorded does that more effectively than to just be live. That there are times when just doing something at the same time someone is seeing it is not actually communicating what you want to be communicating. And so this was, next thing is a very playful example that Michael had that kind of highlighted some of the possibilities that would also be very difficult to do if this was purely a live performance, but something that could easily be woven into something that was a mix of live and recorded.
Researchers in Louisiana first spotted one of the variants and then discovered 6 other very similar variants in other parts of the U.S. All 7 have similar mutations in a key protein the virus uses to infect cells, so researchers worry they may be more contagious. But researchers caution there's no reason to panic. Many mutations turn out to be meaningless. Still, everything should be done to slow the spread of the virus.
So yeah, little creature, very wonderful. And I think I might be glitching out myself. This is not part of the sharing. This is in fact just something I'm going through physically as just a digital ghost. There we are. Now we're switched back. So yeah, so those were some examples of work that we did that was really about exploring these different channels, and part of that was to do sort of just a visceral exploration. It was not to come up with the final word on any of these things, but to sort of explore. Well, if given the opportunity to create something online, what are ways in which I, as an artist, would try to explore some of these aspects. Moving out of that, we have sort of three arenas of focus that came out of those channels, and also, as Akane alluded to before, these borders are not very precise or distinct. They sort of bleed and overlap into each other. There are also probably other areas of focus. These are the ones that we came up with. So those three were looking at ritual, so it's the ritual of an art experience. The digital space, or the creation of space in a digital medium, which is often something that is very challenging and something that can feel so flat. And then also looking at the energy of performance and how to translate that performance into a digital medium. So much of there's an intangible quality to so much of performance that makes it meaningful. And when we talk about passion, when we talk about presence, these are often the things we're talking about. It's this sort of life force that you feel emanating from a performer. And so, what are ways in which that animus can come through in some way? So I say there were three. We then broke up into teams to create works of art to play with that, and no one was on team ritual, in part because ritual really is about defining the parameters of a thing. And in both of these next groups, there needed to be that process regardless. So some questions that we had, or some ideas we had around creating context for a performance that we didn't actually focus on as a team were what are the rituals that the audience can go through to prepare them for work? What are the ways in which we can take digital art seriously, even though we're at home and watching it on the same device that we look at Twitter or check email? Requesting that the audience perform a shared action, such as the lighting of a candle in Logan's piece, was an example of something that can be effective, that there's a moment for there to be a kind of complicity created between audience and performer, even though we are in different spaces. Visually setting up clear, concrete expectations. This is something that happens at a lot of performance, but that there are different expectations and procedures needed for digital space. If you go to a show in real life, you might be asked to turn your cell phone off. If you go to a show in Zoom, you might be asked to not eat food while your camera's on, potentially. I would ask that everyone, though, if you have a cat, to please show me that cat. Even if you are in the middle of a dramatic monologue, I think that's really important that I get to meet your cat. And then refresh the eyes was another discussion point we had, which was about inviting audience to take in different dimensions, texture and light of their space before focusing on the screen, to sort of take a moment that says, like, okay, like you are in a very specific space right now, and to acknowledge that it's there, to not pretend that it's gone in the way we sometimes pretend the world disappears when we watch a movie at a cinema. But no, it's to take a moment. You are in a specific spot in the world, in the universe, and now to transfer intentionally your focus. So those are some things we talked about. Then we had these other two teams, Team Digital Space and Team Transferring Energy. And both of these two teams created a piece of work together in collaboration. And so I'll throw it over to them, and then they can talk a little bit about what they were exploring and what they ended up producing.
All right. Well, before we dive into, we made a video kind of cataloging what we made. But before we dive into it, and before we play it, we should talk a little bit about the genesis of how it was made. So the way that this was made was after we did all these little tiny projects, kind of exploring the art that we were interested in. And then we got together in the digital space and had a 2-hour phone call, just kind of going over what we were interested in, talking about what excited us and what we thought fell flat. So some of the things that we were interested in is that we thought that the leaning into the glitches, like what Jasmine was showing about her glitch video, and kind of Logan's glitching yellow pixelated video was really, really interesting. And we thought that since we were on we're creating this digital space, we should lean into Zoom as the server. Like, this is part of our space. We need to kind of break out of the box, or at least acknowledge that the box is there. That in conjunction with, we found that the bite-sized art pieces were really, really interesting for a couple of reasons. One being that, like, it matches our expectations when we sit in front of a computer with TikTok, YouTube. The kind of art that is prevalent is this bite-sized, small art pieces, and that also allowed us to create kind of an immersive experience on Zoom. We use breakout rooms to let the audience wander through these bite-sized, I'm using that term, these bite-sized experiences. So the way that we generated these experiences is that we picked a theme, which is trying to break out of Zoom. And then we all got together, and I, having used OBS, which is a piece of software called Open Broadcasting Software, which is a way of overlaying videos and doing some interactivity live in what they call a virtual camera, which lets us project things virtually live. I gave a little talk, a little 20-minute demo, and people took that and made their own projects with it. Then, based off of that, we created this little 3-act structure where there was an intro that Logan made a wonderful video, and I did some OBS interactivity magic over it. And then we broke off and let the audience wander. And then there was an ending with, again, a little bit of OBS interactivity magic over it. So that's kind of the structure. And now we can dive into the actual pieces.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our plenary on live performance.
So we're just going to talk over this as it sort of moves through its paces. Basically, what you're going to see here is like the setup, right? Ultimately, we knew that we wanted to... Jeremy, this glitching is cracking me up, man. Ultimately, we knew that we wanted to heighten the ephemerality of the project, despite the fact that it was happening in Zoom, despite that we're showing this PowerPoint. And so we were like, how do we really heighten ephemerality in the Zoom call? Like, what is the epitome of ephemerality? Oh, it's like the Zoom bomb, right? The thing that nobody expects, that nobody wants, that like we're all just sort of crossing our fingers doesn't take place. And like here we're able to sort of bring in the Zoom bomb with some OBS magic, where basically we had this idea that like, oh, we've got these hackers coming in, going against the PowerPoint, saying like, actually, no, Zoom performance is the best. We're going to make sure you never get out of the Zoom room. And if you try, we're going to possess your avatars and display them here, sort of entrapping them. So sort of doing this like magical realist, post-futurist sort of like silly, playful thing, while also trying to like really approach these technologies in a way that we thought was novel. And so here you're going to get sort of the like one of the first ways that was being produced, which was Stewart coming in with like a Zoom conference that he did some very beautiful VJing over, where basically people had the option to go into one of 3 breakout rooms and move between them. However, if they were to come back to the lobby to choose a new breakout room, they would sort of enter this space, which Stewart had beautifully created for them. So I don't know, Jasmine, if you're able to sort of bop us through here to the next room.
Hello. My name is Adam. Artificial intelligence designed and engineered.
So this was my piece here that I did, which I kind of wanted to go very, very low tech with it. So for this, it's actually all spliced together for the full intent of just playing it as a streaming video for this conference here. But in a live event, it would be a mixture of live performance as well as recorded performance that would play in tandem with each other here. Now this right here, I believe it's going to cut to, this would be the part where this would be a recorded performance within this, with this recorded character coming in here, and the live performance would be the artificial intelligence, which just for the purposes of this project, I'm playing both characters. But a large part of it is I don't know. It's interesting to have like this this other recorded screen come in that can kind of be manually held up, and it's all again very low tech. It's just filters and editing being done on the actual recorded material to kind of give it more of a differentiation of the look in it. But that's basically all that I did for this.
So this would have been John's piece, our cohort member John, who worked on our team with us, but wasn't able to be here. He works specifically in radio drama and live Foley, and so his primary interest was sort of that muting of other channels of the visual and the heightening of the audio channel. So. And again, in working with interactivity, the basic premise of this breakout room was you were stuck in, as opposed to the virtual box, a literal box that if you wanted to break out of it, John had a number of live Foley measures set up that he was ready to, with people typing in commands into the chat, as soon as he saw a word come through the chat, as Jasmine is sort of alluding to with her cursor presently, he would take that command as, I guess, law and perform sort of the the requisite responsive sound cue. So here we did a little sample play in preparation for this, where if people typed the word crash, toxic, boo, or haha, I had some sound cues prepared for ways that
You can act like a man. What's the matter with you? You blew it.
So these were, people being able to type in and hear a response and have that engagement. And really, it's a silly example of a concept that could be taken much further, right? Wherein the audience has control over multiple channels of the performance as it stands, where all of the audience members as a whole are reaping the responses that individuals are enacting on the performance.
Okay, so for my piece, so kind of going back over the narrative again, you are in this Zoom call, you were supposed to be getting this presentation. It has been bombed by this virtual group that is telling you got to stay in here, and so you're trying to escape the Zoom call. You have been sent into one of these breakout rooms, and in my room, what I wanted to play with was sort of the illusion of choice and perception. And also using not just visual elements, but what our immediate physical responses are to some of those elements to, again, kind of create this sort of automatic audience engagement that I wasn't trying to go necessarily scary, but definitely a little perhaps uneasy at times. And so the premise of this room is that in order to exit the Zoom call, you have to use this new visual response CAPTCHA. So if CAPTCHA is the system that lets you know you're not a robot by either typing in the right letters and numbers or picking the car or the stoplight, this would be the next step of CAPTCHA that is literally tracking your eye movement. So that's the premise of this thing, and it's it's a pre-recorded, it's ultimately a pre-recorded thing, but it's made to feel live. And we kind of, as we were even planning this, we were talking about being able to use live elements, and I wanted to plant that seed so that when they watched this, they weren't necessarily sure if it was live. So this kind of goes past kind of quickly, but the idea is that this is supposed to track your eye movement to determine whether or not you're human. And so knowing that, basic things about design, like, your eye is more likely to go to the lightest side of a screen or the lightest element of the screen. The first phase of testing are these simple black and white elements. And like, it's, gives you the correct sound if you looked at the right corner, which as a viewer, you're naturally going to do because that's where your eye is drawn. And so knowing that and playing on that, you can kind of build up and create this tension of like, oh, well, I thought I was looking in the right place, maybe I wasn't, and start kind of manipulating with the audience that way. There's other elements like using the use of faces. It's kind of just, it's been studied that like we respond to faces that are looking towards us, faces that are smiling, faces that are brighter, or the images that are brighter. So like in this case, switching from that simple, black and white element to something a little bit more complex, and playing on whether or not they're going to look in the right place or not. And then, so it kind of just, it goes beyond, right? It builds on that and becomes this like hidden element. Also, these are not real people. I use the AI generator face program, which gets very disturbing very quickly. I don't suggest you look at that website at like late at night or anything. But anyway, so that's sort of like the idea of the room. And so as the room kind of progresses, the editing gets faster, you get more wrong answers. And what I noticed playing this one was I didn't really think about the fact that since it's being shared through my screen, I get to see the audience playing it or watching it and see how they respond to some of these optical illusions and things. And it was interesting to see, kind of have that one-way mirror to sort of see like how they respond to this. And I noticed that people who had the time to kind of went back and kind of played through it again. And weren't exactly sure if it was live or if it wasn't. And that's because of the use of that sort of illusion of choice and knowing the sort of like basic elements of like design that way. So that's my side of this.
Yeah, and then we put passcodes in everybody's little Zoom rooms, and then we asked people to enter a passcode, and then we did it live with this giant wall of code and just screen recording some typing so that I could type in live as people entered, and if they entered in incorrectly, then there'd play an error sound effect, and if they entered it in correctly, it would play a success, and we'd shut the Zoom room. The idea being that this is just another way to get people to focus on the digital space that we've created. And Logan made a wonderful audio recording that we played back. And yeah.
So ultimately, I guess a little bit on the nose, but we found that in trying to play with ideas of the digital space, the best way to complete an escape room game-like performance of escaping the digital space was ultimately to close the digital space at the end of the work. And yeah, ultimately tried a number of ways of audience engagement, interaction, and entanglement. Some of which I think were successful and some which, could have used more development, but I think that was ultimately the exact thing that we were going for. Thank you for hanging with us.
Yeah, and just to sort of to tag onto that a little bit too, that these were really were experiments that were made over about 2 weeks to explore some of these ideas, but not to explore them fully. That there were definitely moments, especially in this piece, where it's like, oh, I could see how this could become many other different kinds of performances, and that this could have interesting applications in terms of interactive work with an audience that does not require an audience member to be speaking into their camera. That it's not just interaction doesn't need to be what we're doing right now in a Zoom meeting, but that there are other ways in which you can present material to an audience member and that they can then respond to it in some other ways. We're just enjoying ourselves so much that time is going very quickly. So we're gonna jump over now to the transferring energy group, and we'll let all of you take it away.
Hello, so I'm part of the transferring energy group. My name is Christine Piscura. So our group was Akane, Marisol, Molly, and Meredith. And so just going a little bit into the process and then some takeaways. So part of the energy transfer, things that we were talking about, so what we did was after we were in our small group, we exchanged emails, collaborated, shared files, and also did a quick meetup and just kind of gathered together, got on the same page and moved forward. And something that we wanted to explore in our process was the importance of order in remote performance. So experimenting with how to establish a space and invite mindfulness as a kind of reset to assist the audience's shift from the rest of their day into the experience. I know this is something that has been talked about earlier, so I won't go too much into that. Methods of inviting the audience into the performance as well. So it was mentioned earlier, you know, the audience coming in to the Zoom space or the digital performance space. Methods of inviting them in so they can kind of feel a part of it and make that shift. And mindfulness is a way of doing that. So you'll see in our video, so we're going to share the link to our video. It's about 13 minutes long, I think. So people who are viewing this and are interested can see it there. We begin with a meditation, and it is intentionally just a blank background and text. And so it has a few prompts on it, and it's kind of this introduction that kind of helps establish this space. Also in our process, we wanted to explore what structures or rituals help people feel like they are sharing the space, the moment with other people. We talked about incorporating mistakes and imperfections in the performance. So this was, for context, a recorded performance. There was a live element, which was towards the beginning. During the meditative moment, a question was asked, and the prompt was for people to give their responses in the chat. So that was a live element that was incorporated. But we were mainly doing something that was pre-recorded, because part of this we were talking about was, you know, it's not just about live performance, but what makes a performance feel alive, what makes it feel there and present. And of course, energy transfer is really important to do that. And so how to create that alive feeling is to embrace the imperfections. We talked a little bit about ambience. So in doing sound, leaving ambient sound from the room in, talking about the memory of going to a theater, right? And behind the curtain, as they're changing scenes, you can hear it going on. And that ambient energy kind of brings you into this space. It feels like something, it's atmospheric. We also talked about preserving, or how do we use sound as a means of expanding the space? So again, with that ambience at the beginning, with the silence, there was music involved as well, and songwriting and staging. So useful incorporation of visual variety in dimensions, depths, distances, and light. Again, what makes it feel alive, where it's not just you look like you are staring at a screen and it is a screen and it's just 2D, creating that depth using different channels. Videography, manipulation of different camera angles for visuals helps capture different emotions that can get lost in only front-facing virtual performances or even staged live performances where there is distance, really embracing the fact that we have a camera. If you want a close-up of someone's face, you can do that in this kind of a digital context. Part of our process was establishing and facilitating safety and accessibility for performers and audience participants. So exploring the power of turning off the camera, when to do that, and also boundaries and guidelines and facilitating a live experience in a digital space, and how to go about doing that. Some things, what needs to be very clearly stated, what prompts need to be very clearly stated, and how to go about effective communication, basically. How to effectively convey instructions to break through the screen barrier and establish norms for the space and guidelines for audience participation. And then at what point in a performance is it effective to ask audience members to publicly share their response to a prompt, which was something we explored at the beginning of our video work. And then in our process, it was incorporating the theme of energy exchange in the whole work as a collaboration and as individuals creating art. So what are the editing methods? It being a collaborative piece, making sure we were all on the same page, because we each did our own little parts, and there was some collaborative overlap between people's artworks. So it was really important to stay together and communicate as far as editing methods go, and organization, figuring out what order all the works are going to go into, and then common threads. So we talked about keeping in the ambient energy. There are things that were going to be explored in the piece as a whole and things that we could explore individually as artists. So a theme that we could explore the piece as a whole and individually as artists in our own way is the idea of, okay, how do we preserve ambient energy? How do we preserve it through sound, through visuals, and through different ways? And that is just an example of one of those common threads that we were very intentional about. And then takeaways. So how to technically integrate live and recorded elements. For example, so at the beginning of the chat, just the takeaway was how much time to leave, how to allow for the opportunity. As the piece moved forward, maybe somebody wanted a little bit more time to think about their answer before they answered, but the piece has already moved forward and there's something else going on that maybe they'll feel like, where do I put my attention? So, right, leaving more time, opportunity for individuals to answer the question. Another takeaway was further considering the effect of screens on or off for audience members and artists during the performances being shown, and effectively utilizing the on-off screen intentionally when appropriate. So a large part of it in the takeaway was just being really intentional, being intentional as a group, and coming together and kind of manifesting, formulating, figuring out how to make it work, and really figuring out how to transfer that energy. It's really important to be very intentional and to think about things like, all right, you can turn your screen on or off in Zoom theater. Is there something significant about utilizing that for this particular piece? And then deepening artistic exploration of different channels to engage and interact with the audience, getting into it even more. Like Jeremy was saying, we had a set amount of time. With more time, just being able to get into sound to create more space to explore all these different things and techniques, and to keep the best of live experience and discover and keep the best of digital experience, and to build from there. Some takeaways. Anyone else from the group wants to chime in, but if you feel like I've got that covered, then cool, great.
Yeah, I want to just say that I think something that was really, really wonderful about both groups was the ability to not use a tool. Like there were moments when it was clearly like, all right, I don't, just because I can do all these things with editing, with Zoom, which whatever digital interface I have in front of me, I don't have to. And that is, I think, something that eventually we would all come to as a culture. But it was really valuable to reiterate that limitations, either in terms of how the audience relates to the work or in terms of how the artist creates the work, were so crucial in both those pieces, able to connect and to stay engaging. I think it's such a challenge right now as we as performers move into digital spaces, because it feels like either there are too many options, or we're going to artificially limit all the options down to, well, I'm still going to do what I would have done anyway, but document it, and that the in-between space is far more fruitful in terms of actually doing what we're trying to do. And whether that's getting very technical and trying some very, very sort of novel approaches to technology, or using very simple, humble technology, and that can still provide a meaningful, affecting piece of art. That it ultimately doesn't come down to having the most expensive camera, but having the most useful way to use the camera or the technology at your disposal. So yeah, I thank you so much, Christine, for summarizing that group and so quickly. We're really going for it. So as we wrap up here, wanted to talk a little bit about next steps. So something we were able to sort of touch on a lot of little things. It was very much a smattering kind of approach for this, but there are definitely things that leave a lot to be explored. So if we want, we can just sort of go around and see what people are interested in looking at post research and discovery cohort 1. First, just to begin, I'll share on behalf of Meredith, who couldn't be here, being interested in the tension between accessibility and activating different senses, but not all, the way a live performance would, is something that Meredith is interested in exploring moving forward.
So I would like to go. Moving forward, I would like to see what I can come up with when it comes to sound and video. I know some of you are specialists there. I mean, I've recorded before, but I would like to see, to get more creative in that realm and to use my voice more as an instrument, but then play with it a lot more, and video. So hopefully through the beautiful connections that I have made here, it's going to be some interesting things. There are going to be some interesting things happening soon, God willing.
And just to jump in real quick, I'll share mine next, because it was actually inspired by something that Marisol created for our channel exploration, which is the potential to take the performance out of my living room, and to find ways of sort of building a performance around a live location. So whether that's having some sort of a list, able to listen to the artist while I'm in a particular place. So there was an example of I think it was a photo of a gas station. So if I could go to the actual location of this gas station and then hear a poem composed about that particular moment. So some way in which like an immersive geolocated approach to these devices that I'm already throwing in my bag and carrying with me all over the city. But if there is some way to make that part of the experience. So.
Yeah, I think if I can piggyback on that a little bit, because it's that, but with like a refraction. Through the work that we've done here, and trying to push sort of this work of ritual and grief and grieving, I'm interested in taking sort of some of that work, looking at Shiva, looking at gather, like virtual distant gatherings of grief, and sort of adapting them both in two ways. One, it has been a performance of grief, right? It has been something that is theatrical in nature, while also trying to do the service work of grieving. I'm interested in further pursuing it, not as a performative practice, but as a practice that actually allows and facilitates folks who are experiencing that grief to have a place to go and gather. Sort of facilitating a communal Shiva for people who are in need of it. And two, I, in Philly, will have my first physical exhibition of work in June. And we are working to implement like a version of our performance where someone can sit down and engage with the performance in a space that is not their home. So thinking about how does the performance work for people who are abroad, and how does the performance work for someone who is in a very specific setting.
I'll go next. Pardon the noise. So one of the, Zoom specifically, one of the things that I was interested in was using the negative elements of Zoom, the glitchiness, the freezing, the not quite totally quality things that you have to deal with while streaming video is happening. And those are things that I think are really, really interesting. It'd be something that I'm interested in exploring more. If you can make the negatives a positive, it generally makes the overall experience positive.
Yeah, I've been finding a lot of joy in creative tool use and tool creation throughout this process. And I think that the next things that I'm interested in is creating free to use tools to create beautiful online experiences. I think that hopefully as time goes on, that will become more and more prevalent. But also trying to incorporate some kind of 3D audio or some kind of way of getting the listener to and the viewer of a piece to feel like part of a world inside of a Zoom performance or a web performance or a digital performance of some kind is the next step. And I found a lot of interesting tidbits as into the interactivity, and I hope to incorporate that into the work.
Sort of related to Stewart's next steps. And generally, I'm just kind of interested in taking these like really tangible techniques that my group especially found in terms of energy transfer, whether that's cultivating mindfulness or using silence intentionally or incorporating mistakes and ambient energy. I want to play more with those tools and kind of see how far they can go. Like now that we have the things, I just want to push them and stretch them and reorder them and kind of see what all is possible from there. And I think one thing that we didn't explore as much in our piece that I would really love to get more into is using sound to sculpt the three-dimensionality of a space. So using something like Stewart's software would be super awesome in the future. But that's something that I hadn't really put any thought towards before meeting with this cohort. And because there's so many brilliant sound engineers and sound people in this group, it really opened my eyes and ears to like how sound can sculpt things and like bring you back into like, oh yeah, I'm in a really three-dimensional experience of the world right now, despite staring at a flat screen. So.
I may have intentionally decided to go last because I have the most vague idea of what I want to do next. I think part of it is because I'm kind of coming at this at the other angle. Like I'm not a live performer. So for me, this has been more about learning about what's been lost and how to try to recreate that. So I think for me, I'm I'm still really interested in maybe the non-traditional formats of virtual space. Like, we have a solid handle on like YouTube, but using like virtual calls or other digital platforms to kind of create story that way, I think is kind of where I'm drawn to next, and pulling from other disciplines like live performance, like theater, to inform that instead of just some of my automatic like filmmaking kind of backgroundness. Yeah, that's about as tight of an answer as I can give you right now.
I would say that my moving forward is, well, to continue the conversations and collaborations regarding research and development and in a digital space. Really interested in safety and accessibility, many different methods and modes and techniques, the accessibility just of internet itself, and how that can be utilized, the importance of linking up with organizations and individuals that are working towards making that accessible for everyone. Because with this kind of a platform, the accessibility of individuals who are in different living conditions where transportation maybe is different for them. Individuals who are neurodivergent, right? Figuring out how to use this opportunity to really amplify, boost the accessibility for everyone, like just with and also the different channels, really crafting the different channels, being mindful, being intentional, realizing that people process things in different ways. Visual might be something that resonates with someone, and audio might be something that resonates with someone else. How to weave all of those things together and really invite the audience into an experience that almost feels, in a sense, like a digital room installation.
Yeah, there's a lot to explore here, and I think one of the joys of this whole process has been able to work with all of you, and to be inspired by what is possible. A big part of the loss in this last year has not just been the chance to do a show here and there, but it's been the community, and it's been the chance to learn from people and to be inspired by their work and sort of bring that into your own practice. So this cohort itself has been a bit of a balm for me for that. But at the same time, I'm also leaving and feeling like, okay, well, there's actually a lot that can still be explored. And there's a lot that should be explored, even when we do get back to a point where you can have shows, you can go out and be in your community, that there are still elements of this that are going to be important and potentially better for the art form in general, and that we don't always benefit from a lot of the culture that develops around certain types of performance, and that sometimes that culture can function as gatekeeping and keeping people out, and also then keeping the work confined in a much smaller community, and that there's a chance for all of this to kind of open that up quite a bit. On this beautiful day, I'm gonna choose to be optimistic and focus on that possibility in the space. All right, well, this has been really great. This has been very typical for us, where we said it's going to go this long, and then we just sort of renegotiated. So yeah, for those of you watching right now, thank you so much for being with us during this. For anyone coming after the fact, we're going to be putting up links to both the credits and some of the work that was shown here. Definitely the piece created by the Energy Transfer Group. There'll be a link up to that in the credits of this page. And also there'll be more information at maelstromcollaborativearts.org about this And then our next cohort, which is going to be focusing on interaction and the changes that happen between performer and audience member in any kind of performance. And then we'll be following that up with looking at virtual reality and augmented reality. So we're just hitting the gas very quickly after that. So thank you so much for hearing what we had to say about this, and have a great day.